In the dead of a winter night in 2004, in the sleepy town of Knutby, north of Stockholm, a hooded figure sneaked into a quiet house. Once inside, they crept down the hall, past the nursery where a pastor lay asleep beside his 3 children. The figure paused outside a guest room, then slipped inside. Moments later, the stillness was shattered by multiple gunshots. The pastor's wife was found lying lifeless. She had been shot once in the abdomen and twice in the head. To add to the horrifying twist, a knife protruded from her neck. As dawn broke, the town's tranquility was further disrupted when the murderer stepped forward. It was the couple's 26-year-old babysitter. She said God had instructed her to murder the preacher's wife. In fact, she insisted that God communicated with her directly via text message. Welcome to Cults Uncovered. This is the true story of the manipulative Swedish cult of the Bride of Christ. The Pentecostal community of Knutby, Philadelphia, was established in the quiet village of Knutby in 1921. Before we proceed, let's clarify. This Philadelphia is not to be confused with the Philadelphia in America. Knutby Filadelfia is nestled about an hour and a half north of Stockholm, boasts a modest population of just 500 people. The Pentecostal congregation there was under the iron grip of a manipulative cult leader, Åsa Waldau, also known ominously as the Bride of Christ. Åsa, along with her fellow cult leaders, reportedly brainwashed church members, robbing them of their free will. This video is focused on one of her lieutenants, Helge Fossmo, and his sinister manipulative crimes. Pastor Fossmo was handpicked by the self-proclaimed Bride of Christ to help steer the church. From the onset, Helge Fossmo felt like a big fish in a small pond. Born in July 1971, as the youngest of 5 children to a Norwegian parents in the village of Björneborg, Sweden, his upbringing was anything but religious. Yet, at age 10, Fossmo joined a Scouts program through the Mission Covenant Church, where he claimed to have found salvation. By the time he turned 12, Fossmo had become a self-proclaimed born-again Christian. Despite his family's lack of interest in religion, they never hindered his fervent beliefs. Fossmo wasn't just a devout believer. He was a natural-born leader, charismatic, ambitious, and disarmingly charming. The typical amusements of teenage boys didn't interest him. If it wasn't related to God or religion, he had no interest. During high school, he volunteered at a local Christian cafe. At 17, he met the love of his life, Heléne, a smart, kind girl with hazel eyes who shared his devotion to God. Heléne was a member of a Pentecostal church, which Fossmo eagerly joined, perhaps to win her affection. It wasn't long before he was appointed as a youth pastor. Shortly after joining Heléne's denomination, he claimed to have suddenly acquired the ability to speak in tongues. According to Pentecostal beliefs, speaking in tongues is a sign of being baptized by the Holy Spirit. Fossmo captivated his fellow congregants with tales of prophetic dreams, which he asserted eventually came true. These rare spiritual gifts earned him immense respect within the local religious community. Heléne couldn't help but notice Fossmo's growing popularity, potential, and charm. The two grew close and eventually got engaged. However, despite his pious facade, Fossmo began an affair with another girl. Overwhelmed with guilt, he confessed to Heléne, who forgave him in a display of Christian compassion. That night, he solemnly vowed never to be unfaithful again. If only Heléne could have foreseen the future, she might have chosen differently. In 1993, at the age of 22, Helge Fossmo's life took a dramatic turn when he encountered Åsa Waldau, a captivating young pastor from a nearby village. Åsa, with her natural beauty and hypnotic oratory skills, had an uncanny ability to influence people's minds. Fossmo was instantly overwhelmed by her charisma and commanding presence. Åsa had built an exceptional following at her church, Knutby, Philadelphia, and she quickly took notice of Fossmo's dedication and potential. Before long, it became evident that Åsa was considering Fossmo for a position in her congregation. The more she mentioned the idea, the more Fossmo found himself enchanted by the prospect. It wasn't just him who believed Åsa was chosen by God. Rumors spread that she was destined to play a significant role in the divine plan, a plan Fossmo was desperate to be a part of. They connected on a profound level, sharing a history of finding salvation as teenagers, which forged a deep bond between them. However, there was a dark side to Åsa that many were unaware of. She had been asked to leave her previous church in Uppsala, where she had served as the children's pastor, due to forming inappropriate relationships with several young congregants. In 1997, 26-year-old Fossmo, along with his wife Heléne and their children, relocated to Knutby to fully immerse themselves in Åsa's congregation. The church members quickly warmed to Fossmo, and Åsa soon realized she had discovered a remarkably talented pastor. Fossmo's biblical knowledge allowed him to support Osa's imaginative teachings, including the notion that she was the bride of Christ, destined to marry Jesus at the end of days. The congregation, already expecting Christ's imminent return, was enthralled by the idea that they had a crucial role in ushering in a righteous apocalypse. Osa publicly displayed the love she claimed to share with Jesus, maintaining her earthly marriage to her husband Patrick, while promising an eternal union with Christ. In this peculiar dynamic, Osa and Fossmo began having an affair to the public knowledge of the congregation. While Jesus awaited Osa in paradise, Fossmo was expected to fulfill Jesus' marital role on earth by sleeping with Osa. Fossmo already considered his relationship with Osa to be spiritually intimate. When she requested he satisfy her sexually in Jesus' name, he felt compelled to comply. Sex here was his duty to Christ and to Christ's new bride. Fossmo emphatically fulfilled his new spiritual post. For the most part, the congregation accepted Osa's new role as Christ's bride and Pastor Fossmo's role as the sexual vessel for Jesus. Osa's husband, also a leader in the church, had no problem with the arrangement. The only congregant who struggled with this notion was Fossmo's wife. She expressed her discomfort with the situation, but Fossmo pressured her to accept it, insisting he had to provide Osa what she needed spiritually. Bullied into submission, Heléne felt the weight of her husband's broken promise of fidelity. As Fossmo frequently departed to support Osa, Heléne plunged into deep depression, withdrawing from church activities and enduring intense isolation. The congregation ostracized her, leaving her as the lone dissenting voice in the cult. One of the most dramatic new norms the members came to accept was a chilling prophecy. Someone from the congregation would soon die, and it would be the will of God. In Knutby, invoking the will of God was tantamount to declaring an unbreakable law. Heléne was not convinced by this so-called divine will, and something needed to be done. Fossmo reported his wife's resistance to Osa, who sternly warned him that Heléne's insubordination could have dire consequences. If she continued to defy God's will, she would face a severe penalty: death. Osa confronted Heléne directly, speaking in a calm tone. "You are rebellious. You should not question what Helge does, or that he spends time with me. You should not question me, or God will kill you." Heléne held her breath, too terrified to challenge Osa. Fossmo continued his devoted service to Osa until he allegedly began having a series of prophetic dreams about Heléne's disturbing demise. For 7 consecutive nights, he dreamt of Heléne dying in the same gruesome manner and in the same location, the family bathtub. For 28-year-old Fossmo, these dreams were ominous warnings of punishment for his wife's disobedience. Although Heléne had started to feign support, it was too late. Unable to keep these prophetic visions to himself, Fossmo shared them with several church members. On a chilly night in December 1999, the prophecy tragically came to pass. Heléne was found dead in the family bathtub, appearing to have suffered a serious fall. As her death was investigated, circumstances grew more suspicious. The autopsy report indicated a near-fatal dose of a painkiller in her system, a drug known to cause sleepiness and easily concealed in a colored beverage. Fossmo, who had been prescribed this medication in the past, became the prime suspect. His actions did little to dispel doubt. When he sent Heléne's autopsy report to her family, he erased the notes about the substance found in her system. Ultimately, the authorities ruled Heléne's death as an accident due to insufficient evidence to prove otherwise. Pastor Osa used Heléne's death as proof of her prophetic abilities. Following Heléne's sudden demise, the phrase "going home" entered the congregation's vernacular, signifying that church members could be called to die in service of their prophecy. Heléne's death sparked a wave of dark dreams among the congregants, with many dreaming about the deaths of their fellow worshippers. It became almost fashionable to speculate about who would be next to be called home. Amidst this chaos, Fossmo began to lose his grip. Once Heléne was out of the picture, Osa ensured Fossmo wouldn't be alone for long. She wasted no time in arranging a new wife for him. Within days of Heléne's death, Fossmo became engaged to Alexandra, Osa's younger sister. Alexandra had been engaged to someone else, but almost immediately after Heléne's death, her fiancé abruptly broke off their engagement. By November 2000, 29-year-old Fossmo and Alexandra were married. Despite his recent marriage, Fossmo began spending an increasing amount of time with 22-year-old Sara Svensson, a member of the prayer group. Sara was known for her cheerful and positive nature, and Fossmo quickly took a liking to her, hiring her as his children's babysitter. Sara seemed to understand Fossmo in a way his new wife did not, and he found solace in her company. It wasn't long before their relationship turned into an affair, with Fossmo proclaiming a deep, almost divine love for her. He claimed God's will demanded a covenant between them, sealed through sexual intercourse. To fulfill this so-called divine mandate, Fossmo and Sara frequently left their spouses, pretending they needed to pray or consult on spiritual matters. In reality, they would slip away to the nearest bedroom. Sara's husband, Linus, grew suspicious and tried to keep them apart, but Fossmo was always one step ahead. In 2001, when meeting Sara became too difficult, Fossmo feigned a severe illness. In front of others, he shivered, screamed, and convulsed, claiming he was possessed by Satan's demons and needed Sara, his spiritual nurse, by his side. Relishing her role, Sara took him to the hospital, and upon his return, Fossmo demanded that Sara stay with him using the guise of his possession to continue their affair. Between 2001 and 2002, Fossmo had a new revelation. God wanted him to marry Sara. He expected the other pastors to support this, but they turned on him. Osa confronted him, declaring, "Your dream is not from God." She ordered Fossmo to remain faithful to Alexandra. Faced with no other choice, Fossmo coldly distanced himself from Sara. Confused and heartbroken, Sara continued loving the pastor, and he struggled to resist her, leading to a continued secret affair. One rainy night as he lay in Sara's arms, Fossmo posed a chilling question. Could she ever take the life of another person? Believing it was merely a philosophical inquiry, Sara responded that she could if it was God's will. Fossmo claimed that sending someone home was a merciful act to deliver their soul to God. Thus, the wicked seed was planted. Fossmo continued to manipulate Sara with a toxic mix of affection and cruelty. He alternately made her feel worthless and sinful, then pulled her back in, making her believe she had lost God's grace and needed to regain it. He blamed her for tempting him and used her as a scapegoat to regain favor with Osa and the other pastors. Desperate to reclaim Fossmo's favor, Sara was ready to do anything, including murder. After sowing a sinister idea in Sara's mind, Fossmo carefully nurtured it, persuading her that even murder could be justified. He set his sights on his new wife, Alexandra, declaring her disobedience to God as a reason for her to be called home. When Sara questioned why God wanted Alexandra to die, Fossmo twisted the church's teachings, using Osa's sermons to justify his claim. He argued that anyone hindering Christ's return should be sent home, their soul mercifully returned to God. According to him, Alexandra's defiance of her husband's authority and God's will was enough reason. Initially, Sara resisted, seeing Alexandra as a loving stepmother to Fossmo's children and not wanting to do it. Sensing this hesitation, Fossmo began to isolate Sara, knowing she was dependent on him and desperate for his approval. He manipulated the church against her, spreading malicious rumors and insisting her sinfulness was contagious. Church members, urged by Fossmo, begged Sara to stay home and not attend church, isolating her even further. To further manipulate her, Fossmo planned a romantic getaway for them in Norway, aiming to rekindle their dwindling love. During this trip, he again broached the subject of killing Alexandra. Sara remained hesitant, but Fossmo twisted the knife deeper by revealing he was in love with someone else, having another affair with a married follower. This revelation made Sara jealous and desperate for his affection, exactly as Fossmo had intended. To win him back, she felt she had to comply with his wishes, emotionally disoriented. Sara apologized and begged for his love. Upon their return, Fossmo intensified his manipulation. Sara started receiving text messages from an anonymous sender claiming to be God, echoing Fossmo's instructions. While Sara communicated with God, she continued to see Fossmo, who was still involved with his other affair and still sleeping with Alexandra, though she'd been relegated to the guest room. With so many women around, Sara felt insignificant and devastated. This despair was exactly what Fossmo wanted. He told her to kill Alexandra yet again, and this time, he added another name to Sara's hit list. The new target was Daniel Linde, Fossmo's next-door neighbor and Osa's brother-in-law. When Sara demanded an explanation, Fossmo claimed he had fallen in love with Annette Linde, Daniel's wife, and wanted Daniel out of the way. Sara blamed herself for pushing Fossmo into another woman's arms and accepted the task of carrying out the killings. On November 8, 2003, Fossmo waited anxiously in his car, hoping to hear that Sara had completed the deed. Meanwhile, Sara crept through Fossmo's house to the guest room where Alexandra slept. She took a deep breath and, believing she was doing God's will, opened the door. The house was quiet, and she trembled, gripping the claw hammer she'd brought. As Alexandra shifted in her sleep, Sara swung the hammer, but the blow was unsteady, and Alexandra woke up horrified. Miraculously, she survived the attack and defended herself. The text Fossmo waited for never came. Sara had failed him and God. After the attack, Alexandra went to her sister's house. While Osa wanted to call the police, Alexandra begged her not to, believing Sara was not truly dangerous. The assault was kept secret, and Osa banished Sara from Knutby. Excommunicated, Sara moved in with her father in southern Sweden, wandering his property in a daze, feeling lost and abandoned. In the aftermath, Fossmo distanced himself publicly, but kept in touch with Sara privately, bombarding her with texts, both as himself and posing as God. He reassured her she'd have another chance to make things right. After the initial failure, Sara was desperate to prove her value to Fossmo and God. As December 2003 rolled around, Sara started preparing to return to Knutby to complete her mission. She traveled to Stockholm to get everything she needed to take down her targets. She shopped for the appropriate attire and even met with an underground firearms dealer. She returned to her father's home with a new handgun and fashioned her own silencer. Though isolated at her father's, she was not alone. God texted her regularly, encouraging her to complete her assignment. Fossmo also messaged and called, and in the 8 weeks leading up to her second attempt, the pair exchanged over 2,000 text messages. On January 10, 2004, Sara sneaked into Fossmo's house at night. She walked past Fossmo, who was asleep beside his children, and made her way to the guest room where Alexandra slept. Last time, she stood in the same spot with a hammer. Now, she held a loaded revolver. She shot Alexandra 3 times. To ensure that the job was done, she pulled a knife from her belt and jammed it into Alexandra's neck. Next, she went to Daniel Linde's house and pounded on the door. When Daniel opened it, Sara shot him twice, but he miraculously survived. The bullet missed his aorta by a single millimeter. Sara's second shot pierced Daniel's jaw. She fled, believing she had succeeded. But Daniel had a guardian angel watching over him that night. A friend who was staying the night rushed downstairs to find him bleeding on the floor. He immediately called Fossmo for help. When the pastor got the call, he bolted to Daniel's aid. Fossmo accompanied him to Uppsala University Hospital just in time to get emergency medical care. Once stable, Linde described his attacker as a masked man, but the police had reason to believe the shooter was Sara Svensson. The next day, Sara was arrested and confessed to the murder of Alexandra and attempted murder of Daniel, insisting she acted alone. When the police asked Sara why she did it, she said it was the right thing to do, despite her insistence that she'd acted alone. The police began to suspect Sara had an accomplice. By that point, word about her previous attack on Alexandra had spread. The police found it odd that Fossmo never pressed charges after Sara had tried to kill his wife. In late January 2004, less than 3 weeks after the murder of his second wife, 32-year-old Fossmo was arrested as a suspected accomplice. Members of the Knutby Assembly turned against him, calling him a tool of the devil. Police later filed additional charges against Fossmo after taking a closer look at the death of his first wife, Heléne. They now suspect Fossmo might have been involved in her murder as well. Fossmo denied all the charges, but further investigation revealed his involvement. A forensic lab was able to recover 20 deleted text messages from Sara's SIM card. Investigators also traced a call that took place between Fossmo and Sara just minutes after she'd murdered Alexandra and shot Linde. When all was said and done, the court deemed Fossmo to be the mastermind behind the murder and attempted murder. Without a doubt, he'd been anonymously sending Sara cryptic texts and making her believe they came from God. He was acquitted of the murder of his first wife, Heléne. However, he was found guilty of solicitation of the murder of Alexandra and the attempted murder of Daniel Linde, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Though he tried to appeal his convictions, the verdict was upheld. Sara was diagnosed with an unspecified psychological disorder, and there was debate about how much free will she had in light of Fossmo's emotional abuse. Sara was eventually committed to a psychiatric ward. After 7 years of treatment, she was released and has stayed out of the public eye since. A few years into his sentence, Fossmo remarried from prison, and by 2006 he had officially changed his tune. He admitted that he did pass the messages on to Sara, but he stated he wasn't the one who wrote them. Instead, he insisted Osa drafted the messages and was the true mastermind. He told officials that Osa had threatened the life of his young daughter, which was why he did it. What do you think? Do you think Osa may have masterminded it, or Fossmo is just lying? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, you will certainly enjoy our other cult stories. Click the card on the screen to check them out. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Always remember, beware the leader and never drink the Kool-Aid.